No matter who you are or where you go, heading outside is always worth it. Welcome to Humans Outside, where we're using the Humans Outside 365 Challenge to build a life around spending time in nature while learning from fascinating outdoor-minded guests. I'm Amy Bouchatz. I've let curiosity be my guide as a journalist for 18 years. But life, including my husband's war injuries, had burnt us out. So we moved sight unseen to Alaska to see if a change of scenery and new focus on outdoors was just the shift we needed. Since September 2017, I've spent at least 20 consecutive minutes outside every single day, no matter what, to explore how nature can change my life. Ready to hear from experts and outdoor lovers who make heading into nature just a part of who they are while we work to do the same? Let's go! It's become one of my most favorite conversations I've ever had as part of the Humans Outside podcast. The guest in this best of episode, Cordele Glass, helped me articulate for the first time the way heading outside is the perfect on-ramp to new experiences and creative thought. I now often refer back to what he and I talked about in this episode when explaining how nature can help us be more productive and thoughtful in our indoor lives because of the way it impacts our brains. I'm excited for you to hear this episode again with positive psychologist and creativity expert Cordele Glass and his explanation of the upward spiral caused by heading outside. Okay, here it is. One of the things we love to talk about here on Humans Outside is just what benefits you can find when you make heading into nature a part of your daily habit and routine. I believe that by exploring these benefits, we can learn how to make the most of them, leveraging getting out into nature to give us all the gifts we're looking for and many that we aren't. Over my more than 3 years of going outside every single day for that at least 20 minutes, that's what I've found. One of the best parts of being a journalist is when I have a question about something, I can just call up an expert and sit down for a deep dive to learn more. The benefit of having a podcast is that I get to share that deep dive with you. Today's guest, Cordele Glass, is going to talk to us about how spending time in nature works with our brains to put us what he describes as upward spiral, increasing our well-being and specifically making us more creative. Earlier in the season, you heard from watercolorist, videographer, and runner Max Romy about the practice of art in the outdoors. But Cordele is going to take us deeper into the psychology aspects. And that's something he's especially suited for because Cordele is an expert in positive psychology. He's also a creative well-being coach, has written about creative habits, and told me that he absolutely loves talking about creativity and nature. I'm really excited about this. Cordele, welcome to the Humans Outside podcast.
Thanks for having me. I'm excited to be here.
So I'm talking to you from Alaska. You're in Washington, D.C., but we like to start these podcasts imagining ourselves in our favorite outdoor space hanging out. Where are we joining you today?
That question is really easy for me. The redwoods in California, coastal redwood forest, probably somewhere near Santa Cruz, is definitely my favorite outdoor space. They're just so big and so magical.
Oh my gosh, they totally are. And you and I are from like the same general area of the country. I
Yeah.
am from Santa Cruz, as we talked about before,
hmm
and I grew up just a few blocks from the beach in Little Rio Del Mar.
Nice.
Uh, um, where are you from in California?
I grew up in Fairfield, which is part of the North Bay, so kind of
Okay.
near Vallejo area.
Yeah, awesome. So not for people who are not familiar with California geography, not directly on the beach, but certainly within access distance.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I would often take the ferry across the bay to get to San Francisco, and the ferry is like a 15-minute drive. So like
Cool.
pretty close
Yeah.
to the water. And then Fairfield is actually right on like a marina. There's like a marsh
Yeah.
area that kind of like is seeping out of the bay. So I've always been pretty close to the water. And then yeah, going out to Santa Cruz or San Francisco is pretty regular for me.
Awesome. So tell us, how did you become a person who likes to go outside?
Man, it was all thanks to this very specific outdoor education program called Exploring New Horizons. Shout out. They've got a few they've got a few sites in the Santa Cruz area, but up until then I'd never really done a lot of outdoor stuff. I did go to an outdoor school when I was in 6th grade, but I remember thinking of it more like an amusement park than like a part of the world that I'm connected to really, if that makes sense. Like it was just kind of like going to Six Flags or something.
Yeah, that totally makes sense, and isn't that how, like I mean, sidetrack, but isn't that how we as adults tend to view it too in a way? Like it's a destination instead of something that's just outside of our front door because we put all these, like, I
Yeah.
don't know, definitions around it.
Totally, yeah, and, like, walls and all this stuff. So, yeah, growing up, Fairfield is pretty, I mean, just like a lot of the Bay, it's pretty urban, right? And so I just got locked into a lot of urban and kind of people of color stereotypes about nature in a lot of ways, and I just didn't understand it, but I just randomly got asked to volunteer at an outdoor school. It was like a lunch meeting in high school, and I just walked in, and they were like, "Yeah, you'd be great." And so I was a high school counselor at Exploring New Horizons, which is in the Redwoods. And it was the first time I'd been to the Redwoods, and it was the first time I had really done a lot of like, I guess, education. I mean, the high school counselors are more like babysitters just to make sure all the 6th graders, like, don't run into the woods, but I was just so involved in the classes, like, I was participating more with the naturalists than the kids were, and I ended up going back, like, 5 times during high school, and you stay for a week at a time, and I just kept going back, and I just absolutely loved it, and it just really kind of reshaped how I thought about outdoors and how I thought about myself and my interests, like, I've been doing music since I was about 10, and getting into the Redwoods was the first time I found anything that made me feel as alive as music or drumming, and I just loved it. Yeah.
Yeah.
And so I
Oh,
just, like, never stopped doing that. So I've basically been an outdoor educator since high school from that one program, and it was just so random. I wasn't even planning on going to that meeting. I was going somewhere else, and one of my friends was like, "Hey, come to this meeting with me." And I was like, "Alright, I don't have anything else to do," and then my whole life changed forever because of that one meeting.
so great.
So bizarre.
And it's like serendipity. You know? It's just
Yeah.
I love it. What a great story. And, it's isn't that just how we always find our sparks? That's your parents maybe put you in a class that you didn't actually wanna do, or you stumble on something like you did, and here we are
Yeah.
and, with a whole new focus. Oh my gosh, I love it. Positive psychology is a very specific type of study. Can you describe it for us and tell us what got you interested in it and how you got into the field you're in that vein today?
Absolutely. Do you want the short version, the medium version, or the long version? There's, like, so much that goes into that question. I don't even know where to
Wherever the spirit moves you, man.
start. Nice. Um, I've been into it since undergrad. Um, so positive psychology is essentially just the study, like the scientific social science study of happiness and meaning and joy and well-being and all the things that make life worth living. Um, That sounds like what all of psychology would be focused on, but it turns out just academically and research-wise, most of psychology for a really, really long time has been focused on like what are your problems and how do we make the problems go away, which is a really worthwhile, valuable approach. But it
And
turns out,
and how people also I'm sorry to interrupt you,
oh,
but like
please interrupt. Yeah.
how people think about things, right? Like why people make the decisions they do and
Yeah.
how they get there.
Absolutely. And so most of the focus was on like, well, why are people depressed? Why are people anxious? Why are people angry and sad? And how do we make that go away? And it just became really apparent to a few people in the psychology world that people weren't asking, well, why are people happy? Or the people who
Mm.
have like really great relationships, like what are they doing? As opposed to like the people who have like really abusive, terrible relationships, how do we fix them? And it turns out just like those on the surface might seem like the same question, but it turns out that there's really different processes underlying them and different ways of researching them and really different insights that you can glean when you study it from the other side. And so that kind of spawned a whole field. And that was really resonating with me just because I was really interested in the outdoors and feeling connected in that way. That outdoor education led me into team building, which is really focused on just kind of like trust and confidence and like these more positive aspects. And as a musician, I became super fascinated in expert performance and just like how you get really, really, really good at something that you find really meaningful, and that's not the type of stuff that you learn in like I was taking abnormal psychology classes and like intro to like, therapy and counseling and all those things that I just mentioned that I was interested in weren't even close to being discussed or considered or researched. It just felt so far removed. Um, and so I came up with this is like the one of the nerdiest things I've done for a while that let me know I should probably go down this road is I was taking developmental psychology classes. That's what all my degrees have been in. And I was looking at early childhood stressors and predictors of like really poor childhood outcomes, essentially, right? Which is like psychology as usual. Like, what are the things that lead
Hmm.
children to end up dropping out of school, joining gangs, doing drugs, like
Right.
that kind of stuff. And I was like, "Oh no. I fell into like so many of the risk groups. I like really hit like a ton
Mm.
of these predictive factors that I should be like in a really really bad spot, like single parent household, like really really low income in an urban area, person of color, like there's just like there are gangs around me, there's like substance abuse in my family. There's just like all of this big list of like, whoa, if I were just to go off of this, I should be in a terrible spot. But instead, I was like flourishing with tons of friends at a top tier university, just like living my best life, just like really happy and like at that stage of my life, conventionally successful. And so I was like, why? And so I just kind of reflected on my life, found all these protective factors, and started to figure out like why I went down a different road. And I started to recognize all these things that led to resilience. Like I had music to give me meaning. I had a really supportive parents and friends. I had that connection to nature, even though it kind of came a little bit late. But yeah, I had all these different things and specific types of mindsets. And I just started to write them all down and put them into like a model and of like my own resilience. And then I was like, I'm at a research university. I feel like I just made this up because it was based on all my own experiences, but let's see what's up. So I just went to the Charles Young Library on UCLA's campus, which is like the second biggest research library after the Library of Congress. And I just started researching all the stuff that I was writing down in this model that I made. And I found out that there were absolutely people that were looking at exactly what I was looking at and that they had started a field called positive psychology. And so from then on, I was just reading all the articles I could get and all the books that I could find and looking up all the researchers. And I just became so intrigued and invested. And then, yeah, it just became really obvious that if I really wanted to understand it at the level I wanted to, I'd have to go to graduate school for it. Um, and so
And thus the rabbit hole.
yeah, and that's the rabbit hole. And then
The
I
education
figured it was the
barrel.
right yeah, it made sense just because, like I said, I was already, like, designing models and doing literary reviews and, like, breaking things down and taking notes, and none of that was for a class, I need to emphasize that, like, that was all outside of my coursework. So I was like, "If I'm doing this anyway, I might as well do it for real," and it was definitely worth it because my first class in graduate school was Foundations of Positive Psychology, and I could have been a TA, like, already. There was one concept of savoring that I'd never encountered before, but every other topic in that whole semester, I was already, like, up on. Like, I had read into it, and, like, I knew exactly what they were talking about, so, yeah, it definitely felt like the right path, and so it's just kind of unfolded from there.
Yeah, I am an unabashed optimist, and so, of course, I'm like, "Ooh, positive psychology, that's me," you know? But as you were talking, I was thinking, this is really what you were asking is a question of resiliency, right? Like, what makes some people resilient and other people's
That was
not?
definitely my first kind of interest into the field, and then it kind of broadened from there, but, yeah, for a long time, that was my main focus, and I even kind of my
Yeah,
early coaching work, I called myself a resilience facilitator for a little bit because that was just, like, my
yeah.
main interest, but, yeah, I've kind of broadened and focused in different ways since then, but, yeah, bouncing back from adversity is still, like, the core of the type of work that I'm interested in and what I think can be most powerful for people.
Yeah. Oh, man, different topic for a different day.
Well, I can link it back because part of the reason I'm so interested in resilience and bouncing back from adversity is because that is kind of the foundation of a lot of experiential education and adventure education that I was going through. So I've spent a lot of time working for challenge courses and high ropes courses, to the point where I'm now even a trainer. So I'll just go around the country like training other people on how to use high ropes courses. And the whole premise is this is scary. Like a zip line is specifically designed to be scary. right? Or like, even things like rock climbing or whitewater rafting, part of the reason that they're so fun is because they're challenging, but they're challenging in a way that helps us grow and connect with the people around us and connect with that challenging environment.
So I wanna describe really fast the what a high ropes course is, because some people may not have been on it. So it's like, uh, platforms and rope systems that are bolted into trees, for lack of a better description,
Yeah,
super high off the ground,
about 30 or 40
and
feet.
you sort of climb up there. Yeah, you climb up there and you are in a harness, so it's not unsafe. Like, you're not just walking around the trees like Tarzan, okay? You clip into the ropes course, but then you are in a very unstable feeling environment where you are navigating through these cables between these trees from one platform to another, and it is both terrifying and exhilarating, and it is a challenge,
Yeah.
thus the challenge course.
Mm,
And then often there is zip lining between them, and at the end, you probably have to get yourself out of this tree, and the zip line may not be the way they have you doing it, and it's, I mean, you're jumping out of the tree. So
sometimes, yeah.
with a rope, but it's a lot. I my family and I did the ropes course a couple of times over at Mount Hermon,
Nice.
which is a redwoods ropes course in Santa Cruz. It
Mm,
is very high.
heck yeah.
It is outside my comfort zone. So
There you go. Yeah, so that ties it all back in because, that's like I said, I started doing that kind of stuff in high school. And although the outdoor schools didn't necessarily have like high ropes, heavy challenges, it's still kind of in there, right? Like you're
mhm,
away from home, you're like camping, you're like
yeah,
hiking all day. Sometimes it's raining, but you can still learn a lot from those challenges. And it just turns out
yeah.
also the challenge course in team building and adventure industry is built on metaphor as well. So when I got to grad school, in
Mm,
addition to resilience, that was one of the things I was looking at is how do we actually learn from metaphors? And is this like a scientifically valid way of inducing development and change in people? And it turns out if you do it in, the right way, the metaphors are super powerful. So again, like outdoors as a metaphor for the rest of your life is a really strong way
mm,
to build resilience, right? So like that's part of why after grad school I became a whitewater raft guide and I continued to do like rock climbing and things like that because it became really easy for me to help people map your time on the river, like being thrashed around by rapids and having to deal with that to the rest of your life and how bouncing back from like you fall sometimes you follow the boat, sometimes you take a wave like straight to the face and it's cold and you're tired, but there's still something that keeps you going and something that really feels like it's driving you and it's just so much fun still, right? And so trying to
yeah.
help people recognize that the rest of your life can feel like that as well, just based on how you approach it, right? um just became really important to me.
Hey humans! Did you know you can officially join the Humans Outside 365 Challenge and score some really cool and exclusive challenge swag, including a finisher medal and a decal on humansoutside.com/challenge? You'll also get an outdoor challenge guide written by me for you, an exclusive challenge tracker, and insider info all year long. You don't want to be left out of this. There is never a wrong time to join the Humans Outside 365 Challenge. So get going. Join it today. Go to humansoutside.com/challenge to learn more now. Now, back to the show. I want to describe and define creativity as well before we start talking about that specifically, because as I mentioned earlier in the season, we had on a watercolorist who talked very specifically about finding his own inspiration and using the outdoors to inspire art. But creativity can be more than that. So, what is creativity to you?
The easiest question of all. We should have started here. No, it's a really hard question to answer. And I think part of the reason it's hard to answer is because there's a lot of different ways to talk about it. And so something I've been focusing on for like the last year is almost like synthesizing all of these different ways and approaches into a bigger scope of what creativity is. Um, but I guess the easiest, most conventional answer, at least academically, is it's any type of behavior that blends novelty with utility. So something that's new with something that's useful is how you could tell, like, that's a creative output. Like, and useful doesn't necessarily need to mean, like, practical, but even if you're like, "I like it," then, like, it's useful for being liked. And then, it's gotta be new. So, like, I can't just completely recreate something exactly the same that's already been done and it's useful, then it's just like not necessarily creative. But if it's got some type of new element and then it's also valuable to someone, then we'd call that creative. But that is also really surface level in a lot of ways, right? Because there's so much about creativity that's just personal and like your own preferences and motivations and inspirations, like you were saying. But then a lot of people focus on the creative process, like what you're doing to be creative and how it feels while you're creating, right? So, like, I studied under Mihai Csikszentmihalyi, who vanguarded the scientific study of flow, right? So, like, the experience of being deeply engaged in a creative act is huge. And then finally, after like that, then you have how your creativity impacts the rest of the world, right? So, like, is it accepted by the field? Or do you have fans? Are you connecting with clients? Like, is it impacting the broader culture? All of that stuff is still really tied to creativity. So there's all these different parts. But I guess for me personally, I just still really focus on the experience. Like, are you living your life in a way that feels creative? There's like this edge where you're like doing brand new
Yeah.
things in your life that are super just valuable.
Some people don't feel creative, right? Like
Mhm.
like there are plenty of people who have a much narrower definition of creativity than what you just described, right? But based on what you just described, I'm thinking that you do in fact think that everyone has creativity within them.
Yeah, so again, I don't know. I am planning on going into a PhD program soon, and so I'm already like preparing to give really academic answers to questions like this. I don't know if you noticed that, but like all academics are like, "Well, it depends." Like that's always the thing, or like
Yeah.
it's multiple answers. And like I always thought that was so annoying, but now I like am starting to understand it because even the answer to that question, I used to really for a while be like every single person is always 100% maximum creativity all the time. And then I started to get into personalities and individual differences and environmental factors. And then for a long time, I was like, oh, there are really specific people that are just more prone to creative behavior, or it's
Mm,
just easier for certain people in certain contexts with certain minds and genetics to just have a easier time doing certain things creatively. um, which the inverse of that is like it's just harder for some people to be creative. Kind of the same way, like you could say everyone is an athlete, right? But like some people just have the body
mhm.
and like the resources.
Right. Well, that I mean, that makes sense because, like, I'm over here, like, I can write, right? And I can talk like, I can string words together, okay? But I cannot draw, like, at all, and this was, something I talked to, our previous creativity guest, Max, about, I think during the actual episode, maybe people remember that, but, I can't draw, like, it's embarrassing,
Yeah.
but my
So
grandmother is a amazing artist, right? So, what's up with
yeah,
that?
so there's a huge difference between being creative and like the skill that you have, right? So you could
Mm,
be able to
mhm,
draw really well, but what you're drawing is only things that other people have drawn. So in that case, you could have super high skill,
mm,
but it's just not very creative. Or you could, have really poor dexterity and like really bad gross and fine motor skills, but what you're doing is unlike anything anyone's ever done and people love it and it's super valuable. And in that case you could be
mm,
super creative, even like an eminent creator with really poor like conventional quote unquote skill in that area. So those are actually really different.
okay.
But like you were saying, a lot of people see their low skill and then use it as evidence that they're not creative. And that creates what we call like a
Mm,
downward spiral or negative feedback loop where you say, I can't draw, thus I'm not creative. So I'm not going to try to draw. So then you have no evidence that you could draw, which just proves your point that you're not creative and you can't draw. So then you just never draw. So then you never have any reason to think that you can draw. And it just kind of reinforces it.
mm.
Where if
Yeah, I
you
see that.
actually just try to draw, then you've got evidence that, like, well, I can draw. I might not be able to draw as good as someone else, right? But I definitely can draw, and then you've got evidence that like, well, it's possible for me to draw, so maybe I'll try again. Or maybe an opportunity comes up and you're just like in a waiting room and you're like, well, I could just draw. And then if you actually like it, you might just draw because you like it, and that's like the spark that you were mentioning before. Some people might find that spark. But if you just kind of shut yourself off from all
Mhm.
these potential sparks, you're like, well, I've never done acrobatics, so I can't be an acrobat. I've never done this, so I can't do that. Instead of trying new things, then you kind of pigeonhole yourself in. But this goes
Ah,
back to what I was saying about
Cordele, you're seeing my soul, man.
I see it right there.
You're seeing my you're seeing my bad
Are
habits.
you in that loop where you're like, "I can't do any of these things, so I'm not gonna do these
I
things?"
am yes, I am totally that person. I am a person who I have trouble trying new things because I don't like failure.
Yeah,
And so I am so the person who tends to only do things that I know I'll be good at, like
yeah,
not intentionally. And I mean, I'm sure at some point that was an intentional choice, when you're in high school or whatever. But at this point in my life, I find myself only trying and showing up for new things that I can do. For perfect example, I signed up for and paid for a seed starting class, okay, here. And people our growing season's really short. You have to start all of your stuff inside and then have this elaborate greenhouse set up and all of these things. Now, there's a variety of reasons that I was like, this is going to be more than I'm willing to do. Like having an elaborate greenhouse set up in my house. Like I just don't have the right spot for it. And it wasn't something I was willing to tackle. But
mhm,
the primary reason I did not show up for that was I kill things. This is not gonna be something I succeed at, and I shouldn't waste my time.
yeah. So
Instead of being like, "Oh, maybe I'll learn,"
exactly. So there's kind of 2 really big things that impact that. One is like your mindset, like you were just saying. So that's a big part of the creativity coaching that I do is just the way you're thinking about it. And one of the main mindsets in this case is a growth mindset versus a fixed mindset. There's been tons of research on this by Carol Dweck, and she like inspired a bunch of other researchers to look into this where some people think like, oh, my abilities are fixed and unchanging. So like I'm just not a math person. I can't do math. Versus like I haven't put in the effort to do math very well yet, but I know if I try really hard and dedicate time and energy, I could grow in that area. It turns out people can change. That's like the whole premise of all of developmental psychology and education in general. And there's tons of research on brain plasticity now, even in adults. So, like, the truth is, you can definitely grow and change, right? Fixed mindsets are generally just incorrect. I mean, there's, a certain limit to everything. Like, you can't probably grow 5 feet tonight. But for the most part, especially things like creative skills, everyone can definitely learn how to not kill a plant. You can definitely learn how to draw if you took some classes and put in time and effort and energy, right? But the mindset you have will really impact it. So that's a big area. But the second part goes back to what we were saying earlier about is everyone creative? So on that side, everyone is definitely creative in that everyone can definitely do these things. Like everyone can draw in one way or another. Even if you don't have arms, you can draw. I've seen people draw without arms, right? Like there's not really an excuse in that sense. However, not everyone is open to new experiences. So that's the second part of what you were saying is like
Mm,
you're not trying things unless you know you can do them. That's one of the main differences between people who are creative people, quote unquote, and those who aren't, is some people are just more prone to trying new things and enjoying new experiences, which opens them up to radical new ideas so that they have this novelty. And then they've got all these experiences that show them that they can. Like, I love doing all these new things, and that's proof that I can do more things. And so then it creates a positive feedback loop, the opposite of what I described, where you think it's fun to try to draw. And so then you draw and you really like it. And you're like, well, if I could draw, I could do graphic design. So then you do graphic design. You're like, oh, I can totally do computers. So maybe I should like start building a computer because I did graphic design. And then you're like, oh, I have to code. So I could be a coder. If I could draw, I could code. Let's just try it out and see what it's like. And then all of those just accumulate. And then all of a sudden you're doing code, but you're using techniques from drawing and you're coding in ways that no one's ever coded before because you have all these unique experiences in your past that you blend in with your current practice. And then all of a sudden you've got a brand new way to code that's really, really useful. And then you're like a creative coder, right? But the only reason this figurative person got there is because they just tried all these new things in a way where they thought they could grow. And so that's a lot of my creativity coaching is just helping people understand that landscape because it's like pretty
you're you're blowing my mind.
Yeah. It's a lot of parts, it's a lot of parts, but once you see how it works, it's, like, not that hard to navigate, and so in that sense, everyone can be creative, but you've gotta be willing to try new things and be uncomfortable. That's a huge part of the process.
So, I think I know where we're going with this. How does nature this is like the goodness here, right?
Yes.
How does nature impact that?
Right. Well, that's, like there's so many ways, right? Like, there's so many ways being outside can impact that. There's, like, a laundry list, essentially. But going back to, like, that main point I was just saying is, like, there's nature's just so diverse. And so if you're willing to open yourself up to the diversity of nature, you're just gonna have unique ideas, right? Like,
Mm,
even just in Santa Cruz, like, you could be I guess this might be, like, a really Californian thing to talk about, but yeah, you could go to the beach, and then the next day, like, go into the mountains, and then the next day you're at, like, a foggy marsh, and then the next day you're literally in the desert, right? And all those experiences are really, really distinct and different, and even if you're in the same place, like, I've been on the East Coast for a little bit, and I've been learning that seasons, can be really, really different, which in California, it changes, but not like out here. But yeah, so that's a big one. Is like the more comfortable you are with being in nature, the more comfortable you'll become with diverse new experiences, right? Like imagine going outside and then you
mm.
see like a deer that you've never seen before. Like I've never seen a deer with those spots and like those types of antlers. Could you imagine being like, I don't want to see it because I've never seen that deer before. Keep it away from me. Right? Like I don't want these new
Yeah.
experiences. Like there's a river on the other side of that ridge we've never been to, being like, "No, I can't see that river because I've never been to that river." Right? It's just like it doesn't make any sense. So the more time you spend
Yeah.
going outside in a way where you feel safe and connected, it's easier to translate that
Mm,
and like, "Oh, yeah, let's, go try out this new art class," right? It's like, "Well, I can't draw. I don't wanna do that." It doesn't make as much sense, right, when you feel safe in the
mhm.
environment. If there's something that's new, you're down to kinda check it out, and all those new experiences will give you, like, fodder for creative ideas, right? That's, like, the whole field of biomimicry is just, like, looking at how nature does stuff and be like, "That's a cool solution. Let me try it in my own way in a new context." Right.
It's so interesting that you're saying this because I've never thought about the propensity to try new things outside or the necessity to try new things outside in my case as being part of spurring creativity in other ways.
Yeah.
So, here in Alaska, it's very cold right now when I'm talking to you.
Mhm.
Uh, it is, well, it's not the coldest day. It's a hot 28, so that's actually pretty warm for today, but it can be very, very
Yeah.
cold. Um, if I have a commitment to go outside every single day for 20 minutes at a time, as I mentioned, like
Mhm.
bare like minimum of 20 minutes,
I love
often
it.
more. Okay, in the summertime, you can super do that sitting by a campfire or on your porch and reading a book. Like no new things necessary. This is fine, right? Sedentary is checks the box.
Yeah.
In the wintertime, it's too cold for that nonsense. You got to be moving, you got to be doing
Yeah.
stuff. And like, there's only so many times I wanna walk down the same path in the woods, right? So, I have tried a lot of new winter things that I would never, ever, ever, ever have done,
Nice.
because I, first of all, was like, I don't like being cold, so I'm not gonna go do that, right? Like, why would I put myself in a situation where I'm gonna be cold? But because I have this commitment, right, I'm outside trying these new things, and that's just, been one of the side benefits I've seen to do having this habit is that I now ski, even though I am very much on record as saying, like, we my family and I filmed a reality TV show episode, which is like a very normal Alaska thing to do. It
Yeah.
sounds so crazy, but it
We've
is.
all been there.
Um, yeah, but and I'm like in this TV show saying, "I will never ski." Um, and here I am, take like this evening, my kids have Nordic ski class, off we go, you
Nice.
know. And it's just anyway, you're blowing my mind. That's what I'm trying to say. You know?
Yeah, because that particular kind of way of thinking, I that might fall into another mindset that you could call, like, uniperspectival or multi-perspectival, which is just, like, trying to look at something from a new perspective, right? So you might be
Mm,
like, "I can never ski, I will never ski," is the only perspective that is correct, right? Is a very quote
Mhm.
unquote uncreative way of looking at things. Whereas like skiing seems like a terrible option from this perspective. Are there any other ways to look at
Mhm.
this where skiing might be valuable? And you just kind of proved it to yourself,
Mm.
right? Like in retrospect now, that in a
Right.
different context, skiing could be really cool. If I look at it from a different perspective, skiing could be super valuable.
Mhm.
And so creative people are really good at seeing perspectives, multiple perspectives, and just kind of
Mm.
choosing ones that are most valuable and interesting. Feeling limited is usually not the most valuable perspective. So if there's another perspective, you're like, I could be a skier in this context. It just feels more empowering and fun and interesting. So creative people tend to pick those perspectives, which just lead to more fun, interesting experience.
Wonder if this is not something that is, a skill you build? Like, the more you do it, the easier it becomes?
Yeah, it's absolutely a skill. So it's really tied to a lot of work done by behavioral therapists. There's actually kind of a new emerging field I've been looking into, which is positive cognitive behavioral therapy. Because these mindsets we've been talking about are very cognitive in nature, right? And so they're really malleable in
Mhm.
that sense, where with some practice, and because like a skill, so like with some practice, you can recognize when these particular thought patterns come up and then decide if you want to go with them or not. And you can literally train yourself to just come up with different explanations of experience, right? So again, it's often used for things like depression, right? It's pretty obvious to a lot of people to recognize like someone's like, well, I'm worthless and everyone hates me. You can be trained to be like, well, my mom loves me and my brother loves me and like I do provide value to people, and you have to like look at that thought pattern, recognize that it's not helpful, and then actively choose another one, right? And so that's easy to understand for like really serious depression or anxiety or something, but the same thing keeps happening, right? And so I'm really interested in those things for creativity, where some mindset patterns just make you way less creative, right? Like I could never ski, right? Like is with a really specific one. That's this fundamentally the same as like no one will ever love me, right? Like it's not that dire or that serious, but it's still just like a statement that you could believe, or you could question and look for evidence and kind of consider a new way around it, and it's absolutely a skill. So some people
Mhm.
are just really really good at recognizing limiting self-beliefs and then just like doing it anyway, right? And that's part of why I love challenge courses
Yeah.
and outdoor adventures, is because I've seen so many times, like you have no idea how many times I've seen someone about to do a rock climbing wall or do a zip line or jump off a pole, like you were saying earlier, and they will sit there and tell themselves, "I can't do this. I'm not a person who can do this. It's impossible." And with a little bit of coaching, like they'll be able to do it, and it just happens so often.
Mhm.
Well, people will have these beliefs about themselves that are just untrue. And so doing the work to just reflect on those and then just try it out. Cuz like if you can't do it, then it's, it's fine, just don't do it. But a lot of people make that claim way before, right? So like there's a possibility that you really can't ski. Like maybe your knees are just designed in a way where like that type of pressure will break, right? Or like, there are cases where there's things you can't do. Like I said, you can't grow 5 feet overnight, but like by and large, that's not what people are talking about when they're limiting themselves. Right? Like it's usually things like I can't draw, but they mean like I can't draw expertly, right? That's not the same thing.
Mm. Mhm. Yeah. You talked about downward spiral earlier. The opposite of that is an upward spiral. How does spending time in nature impact your ability to have that upward spiral?
Absolutely. Yeah, so that's just another really great way that nature helps you be more creative and just brings more well-being, is just being out in nature is just really good for your body in so many ways. One, like you're generally active, like you're saying, you're walking around. The air is usually fresher, right? And also just being exposed to things like bodies of water and green spaces has been proven to really like reduce stress in your body, and cortisol levels go down. It literally impacts your immune system. Like you produce more white blood cells, and just there's like lots of physiological benefits to being outside. And so an upward spiral is really just the process of a positive benefit leading to more positive benefits, right? So like your physical body just
Mm.
feels better because you've been going outside. So now you're getting better sleep. So then you're more well rested, so that
Mhm.
you're in a better mood when you're with your family and friends. So then they feel more connected to you. So then you have more opportunities to spend time with them, which leads to more opportunities for doing fun things, which then makes your body feel better. So then you get more sleep. And it just like they all kind of connect and lead to an upward spiral. So
Mm,
it's the antithesis of like, you get laid off from your job. So then um, you start to stress really hard. So then you don't sleep. So then you feel exhausted and frustrated. So then you don't hang out with your friends. So then you feel isolated. So then you're not motivated to look for a new job. And it just like spirals downward. It's the same kind of
right.
process, but it just builds in the other direction. And so getting outside is like a really easy component to add to an upward spiral for the most part. Like if you're trying to build that kind of forward positivity momentum, getting outside is like one of the easiest and funnest ways to add an extra element that's going to like lift you up in that way. Just yeah, just physically. Like you don't have to do anything. Just hang out next to a lake and your body's like, that's
Yeah. Yes. I know exactly what you're talking about. It's that
yeah,
that you find yourself that deep
yeah,
sigh that I find myself doing after just, 5 minutes on a walk away from my phone, but in some, not even trees necessarily, just some bushes, right? Like
yeah,
whatever nature I can find offers that release just by proximity.
yeah.
And
So I have
it's
a really like
glorious.
technical explanation of why that happens, and then I have a really personal theory that excites me. So I could share both of those if you'd like. There's
Yeah, tell us them.
so there's research on this theory called attention restoration theory, and some of that work has been done by Oli and White and Wheeler and just like a whole bunch of people. It's a theory, right? So it's got a lot of evidence behind it, and a lot of different people have looked at it. And essentially, attention restoration theory is like your attention can be used up. So there's lots of research that shows like your willpower or just like how much you can focus is essentially
Mhm.
like a
Mhm.
muscle. Like your brain literally uses glucose when you're trying really hard to focus, and then it can get exhausted, and then
Mhm.
you make way different decisions. But when you're spending time in natural
Right.
environments where it's green or there's lots of water and open space, it will like help those to restore themselves. Like your brain and your attention and your focus, your ability to focus just gets stronger, and it just feels like
Mhm.
you can feel that. It feels nicer, right? It's like you feel
Yeah,
restored,
it
like you were
does.
saying. Yeah. And so there's a bunch of kind of no one really knows exactly why that happens. There's like mechanisms that people have like looked at, but I have a guess as to exactly why that's happening. Just from my own experience, is
Yeah.
everything in the modern kind of developed urban world is made for
Mhm.
a reason. Have you noticed that? Like these headphones are for
Mhm.
listening to things, and this microphone is for
Right.
accepting sound, and this desk is for holding like laptops and coffee mugs, and a door is for like everything is for a reason.
Mm.
It has a purpose and it has like a
Mhm.
message. It's telling you something. But when you go outside, like what is that rock next to the stream for? Right? Like,
Mm.
what is this tree for? Like, you can come up with reasons, like we were saying, or like this tree is for a challenge course, right? And you can like do
Right.
stuff with it, but nothing is
Can
screaming.
assign them.
Yeah, you can assign them and you can go in. And that's kind of what I was saying before is like seeing outdoors is like a theme park. Like this is for playing tag and this is for fishing. And like you can absolutely see it like
Mm.
that. But you kind of have to make that more. Like you have to kind of construct that
Mhm.
more than you do if you're in a house or in a city or something. And so there's just less demand on your mind to come up with reasons for why these things are here and what they're for. They're just being, they're just hanging out.
Mhm.
And so it's easier to just
Can
be
you give us
on with these things.
Can you give us maybe just 1 or 2 actionable steps, that people can use to, increase their creativity outside? Just like, "Go forth, do this." I'm a doer.
Yeah,
Can't help it.
absolutely. I'm also a doer. I think the big one is what we've been talking about this whole time is just trying new things outside. Like if you've never climbed
Mm.
on a rock, like go climb a rock. If you've never been in a river, like find a way to safely do it, right? Whether it's like with a guide or an instructor or someone who
Yeah.
knows a lot. Um, but yeah, I think accessibility is like really, really important part of what the outdoor industry is starting to look at is because like the simplest thing you can do. Like we were just saying, like you don't even have to do anything. Like just go sit next to the ocean and like you'll get all these benefits. So kind of just working on accessibility and figuring out ways that you and your family and friends can access the outdoors is great. And I've learned that a lot of people think it's way harder than it is. Like
Mm.
camping, like literally just Google campsites near me and find one and then just go
Mhm.
there. And you don't even need to like camp for a lot of days. You don't need tons of equipment. Like that's been a big thing that I've been interested in is making it easier to get outside. So for example, like I made my backpacking backpack from scratch with like a $5 tarp and like a bunch of sticks and like strips of leather. Just like tied them together and it works exactly the same. So I've been on trips with people who have like $300-$400 backpacks. And mine was made out of like $10 of material and sticks. And we're doing the exact same thing. Like there's like this whole culture of like you need all the fanciest equipment and you need like the really nice whisper light. You gotta have all the climbing gear and like you need these specific boots. You
Yeah.
gotta have the winter shell if you're gonna go out and like you those are just barriers for so many people, and so, I don't know, I would say, like, just kind of being able to
Yeah.
see through those barriers and just to try to get outside one way or another is, like, my biggest piece of advice, I would say. And if you can't get outside, try something new. That would be, like, the second part for you, because I know you're getting outside every day, so you're like, "Go outside." That's not really
Yeah.
advice,
Well,
right?
a
But,
lot of
like
people a lot of people listening to this are too, and the whole point of this is, I mean, it's twofold. It's get outside every day, build that outdoor habit, and then once you have it, you gotta keep it. You
yeah.
know, like, habits are only habits because you do them.
Exactly.
So
And so I think if you can understand that part, being able to tie it back to other parts of your life is probably really valuable, right? Like
mm,
the outdoors
mhm.
are some of the
Yeah.
most palpable metaphors possible. And what's crazy about metaphorical thinking and analogical reasoning is it could be anything you want, right? Like you could be climbing a mountain and just decide this mountain now represents my relationship. And you'll just start to see all these
Mhm.
little things that really tie on, right? Or like, yeah, you're like
In
hanging
a
out at this
new and useful way.
yeah, exactly. And so, yeah, if you can take any insights and just bring them to your life in yeah, new and useful way, you're gonna just start being creative, right? So even that piece of
Yeah.
advice I said before, right? I was like, just go outside and just see what you can do. Accessibility. If you're already kind of going outside, you might be like, yeah, that's obvious. But even that, if you can understand that with the outdoors, take that somewhere else, right? So like drawing, for example, you were saying like you're not a drawer, right? Just draw just like sit down and draw something. And if you don't feel safe, get an instructor, right? The same way I'd be like, just get in a river. And if you don't feel safe, like get a river guide,
Right.
right? And like if you can understand that, it'll benefit your life. There's all types of benefits for drawing and for painting and watercolor and making music. That's why there are whole industries of art therapy and music therapy. And like there's
Yeah.
tons of crazy benefits in addition to the fact that it's just fun and cool, right? Like it's just
Yeah.
enjoyable to do. And so if you can really start to connect with the outdoors, start to recognize that the outdoors map on directly to the rest of your life is like I guess
Mm.
it sounds kind of philosophical, but I swear it's really actionable, right? Like there's so many really specific examples. Like we were saying, like even going down a zip line, for example, that kind of leap where you're like, it feels scary, but I know the process is going to be valuable. That shows up in people's lives all of the time.
Yeah.
Um, and I
I'm sure
think,
it
yeah,
does.
that big one is just being like, I'm not the type of person that could do these things, right? When you're outside, you don't have to be any type of person. Just like that rock doesn't need to be for anything, right? That tree is
Mm.
not the type of tree to like anything. It's just being what it is. And so being able to do that when you're inside or outside, it's just really going to help your creativity a lot.
So good. Okay, so you mentioned a few seconds ago that you dislike the outdoor, this idea of outdoor gear, and we always ask people what their favorite outdoor gear or most essential is at the end. But I want to caveat that with it's a really broad question. I consider snacks to be an essential piece of outdoor gear. Depends how how many kids you're taking with you and how much you like snacks. So, tell us, considering the broadness of this, what is your favorite outdoor and most essential outdoor gear?
I think I've got really sensitive eyes, I think. So like if I'm going outside, I'm like, I need those
Mm.
sunnies. I gotta have some sunglasses.
Mhm.
That's necessary, but not required. But I just have this strap that I use for rock climbing. It's literally just like a
Mm.
stitched loop. That's I think it's rated, but it's just so fun. I don't know what it is. I just love playing with it. I love having it, and I love like daisy chaining it and tying it to myself. It's not supposed to be a toy, but yeah, it's like my favorite item I have. But
Yeah,
utility definitely.
that's great. I love it. Yeah, I've had people tell me, they think their most essential or favorite is a good attitude, which I'm like, "Yeah,
Ooh,
sign me
can
up."
I change
That's
my
true.
answer or what?
Yeah, I mean, you can. All
Yeah.
right, leave us now, if you will, with your favorite outdoor moment. If you close your eyes and imagine yourself in your favorite outdoor moment, just that's something you hearken back to, where are you and what are you doing?
Man, there's so many good ones. I led trip, this backpacking trip in Anza Borrego State Park, which is like a desert area in California, and is a desert mountain. And we hiked all the way to the top, and the trip theme was meaning and purpose. So we were having lots of activities and discussions on how to kind of craft our purpose in life and how to recognize and find meaning. And we were literally on a plateau, like at the top of this peak, and we were having a conversation, and the conversation just completely stopped because the sun was setting, and all of us just sat in silence and watched the sun set. And we were at a peak, so it was just like 360. You could see the horizon all the way
Mhm,
around, and I swear that sunset said more than like the entire conversation we were having about meaning and
mm,
purpose. Like looking at that sunset had more depth than deeply contemplating why we're here and what we want to do with our lives. Like it just seemed like nature was like, let me explain it to you. And we all just sat there and watched, and it was like, yeah, time stood still for a while.
beautiful. Cordell, thank you so much for being on the Humans Outside podcast today.
Thanks so much for having me. This was really fun.
Thanks so much for listening to this week's episode of Humans Outside. If you've enjoyed this episode, give us a little love and leave a rating and review to make it easier for others to find the podcast too. What you say matters. It really truly does make a difference. And until next time, we'll see you out there.